All right. Nick, I'll just take it from here and then hand it over to you when I'm done, okay? Welcome everyone. Good morning on the West Coast, good afternoon in other time zones. I'm Angela with Marrone Bio Innovations, and I'm here with 3 other colleagues. We're so pleased to have you online to present to you managing problematic diseases and insects in cannabis. We have our resident experts as well as a wonderful guest speaker. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to remind you, one, this webinar is recorded. We will share a copy of the presentation in PDF form, as well as a link to the video after the webinar. It's usually later today or tomorrow that I try to get that follow-up email out. That will also include a quiz in which you need to complete and pass with a 70% pass rate if you want to achieve or receive the California DPR units, which we do have available for this webinar. I'll be sharing that code in just a moment. If you have any questions or technical challenges throughout the webinar, use the chat just to chat. If you have questions, post them in the Q&A section so we can just make sure that we don't miss any questions. Sometimes these webinars get quite active and we want to make sure we're answering your questions, because after all, that's what we're here to do, is just to be a source of information and obviously answer your questions about growing cannabis. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay, so I'd like to introduce to you our speakers. Our first speaker is Nic Steeneken, and he is born and raised in Temecula, California, and has always had an interest in agriculture, animals, and nature. His passion for agriculture led him to Cal Poly Sonoma, where Nic graduated in 2018 with a plant science degree and a minor in integrated pest management. Upon graduating, Nic worked for a large commercial cannabis greenhouse facility. While working at the greenhouses, Nic saw the need for more professionalism and education within the industry, leading him to earn his PCA and QAL licenses. In December of 2019, so about 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, I guess, Nic met Matt Brecht, who is also online with us today, at MJ BizCon, which is a very popular conference in the cannabis industry. And from that meeting, Nic came on board as an intern with Marrone Bio, spent about a year with us as an intern before being promoted to the Northern California Territory Sales Manager last winter in December. So Nic, for the past year, has not only helped in the Northern California market, called on a lot of hemp and cannabis growers. So he's been hearing a lot of the questions and challenges you all are dealing with, but he's also assisted with our pace setter demo trials in the Midwest. That's our new product for row crops, and has helped a lot with our webinar. So Nic has a great passion for cannabis. He's grown cannabis, had a lot of experience in the industry, and he'll be walking through a lot of the product information and the company information today. Our next speaker is our guest speaker, Darren. Darren Binkley has been growing cannabis, or I should start with, he's the director of cultivation at Palomar Craft Cannabis down in San Diego. Darren has been growing cannabis for more than 2 decades and served as head grower at Green Hand Farms and cultivator at Outco before joining Palomar Craft Cannabis, all based in San Diego in May of 2017. Darren brings a comprehensive understanding of numerous growing methods to his role at Palomar, from hydroponics and regenerative agriculture to cannabis genetics and best practice propagation techniques. He has a passion for creative problem solving, which we certainly need in this industry, right? And is always looking to master and improve the new techniques and market insights. Darren has been active in cannabis competitions with placements at WeedCon Buyers Cup, Emerald Cup, San Diego Cannabis Farmers Market, Farmers Cup, and Farmers Cup Second Edition. Darren has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Anthropology from the University of Redlands, California, a Master of Arts in Sociology from the New School of Social Research in New York City, and a Master's of Arts in Clinical Psychology from Pepperdine University in LA. So he has a wealth of information and a very unique background. Thanks so much for being on the webinar today, Darren. Really appreciate it. And Darren's going to be sharing a lot of the best practices that he recommends from his experience growing cannabis. Our last speaker is our in-house cannabis expert plant pathologist, Dr. Matthew Brecht. He is a key account manager for Marrone Bio Innovations and the founder of Dutch Valley Farms, which is a tier 1 indoor cannabis grow operation in Estacada, Oregon. He is a dynamic and experienced sales and research professional with over a decade of experience with Syngenta, and now is at Marrone Bio Innovations. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, a master's degree in plant pathology from the University of Florida, and a Doctor of Philosophy, Plant Pathology from the University of Florida. So Matt, thank you for being on today. Appreciate it. And hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties anymore, right? All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Nic, who's going to go through the agenda and share that important continuing education credit information that I know some of you are looking for. So with that, Nic.
All right, thank you for that, Angela. So if you are here in California and need DPR credits, we have our session information here, and we'll also have it on the last slide. Our agenda for the day, we'll start with a quick introduction about Marrone Bio, who we are as a company, what we do. We will cover our product portfolio. We will cover common diseases for cannabis. We will cover common insect and arthropod pests. And we will then open up the discussion with Darren about cultivation and pest control best practices. And then we'll follow that up with a little conclusion afterwards. So this is our safe harbor statement. Marrone Bio is a publicly traded company, so we just have to put it out there. Please don't make any, this presentation may contain forward-looking statements. Please do not trade stock based on anything we have to say. All right, so we were founded in 2006. We became incorporated in 2013. We are headquartered in Davis, California. A lot of our manufacturing is done in Bangor, Michigan. We have over 450 patents worldwide on different bioorganisms and plant extracts that we use to formulate our products. Our CEO is Kevin Helash. He is the successor to Pam Marrone, who has gone on to do many great things and will continue to do them. Let's see here. All right, so our product, here's our product portfolio. We have fungicides, bacteriicides, insecticides, some plant health products, and something that is newer to Marrone Bio is our crop nutritional products. What we're going to really be talking about today is the products that are used in the cannabis market, which would be JetAg, Regalia, Stargus, Grandivo, and Venerate. So that will be what we focus on for this presentation. Whoops, too fast. So our insecticides and nematicides, Grandivo and Venerate, are what we're going to talk about today, along with Regalia and Stargus, a little touch on JetAg as well. I'll be going through the product information, and Matt will be doing a lot of the disease introductions and research trials, things like that. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Matt.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up, Nic, I see you. Okay, great. All right. Okay, so hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this cannabis webinar. Yeah, as you said, I oversee the CG product line, so our cultivated carp product line for the United States and Canada. In Canada, we have one product over there so far. It's called Regalia Max. But yeah, hopefully we're expanding to more products up in Canada as well. But today we'll talk about the diseases, insects, some other issues going on, and kind of how to deal with it, IPM. When I talk to growers, I like to get an idea of what products they're already using, and then try to incorporate products or applications or methods in order to control their insect or disease problem. So for today, as far as the diseases goes, we're really going to cover 3 diseases. I know there's a couple other ones, but like for instance, the virus. If you get one of the viruses, there's really nothing you can do. So other than throw it out and get a new plant. And as far as powdery mildew, bud rot, and fusarium goes, these are the major ones that we see very commonly in grow operations. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So for the first slide here is this is powdery mildew. Obviously, you see the mycelium on top of the leaf. It's on top of the leaf, not underside of the leaf. So it's different than insects, which are underneath the leaves typically. And powdery mildew in cannabis pretty much starts off in the late veg, early flower, then sort of progresses through there. If you're going to be using products early on, you want to start a transplant and do kind of successful applications every week or 10 days or 2 weeks up until when you think you're going to stop with flower. So a lot of times people stop in flower right around week 5 or so. But some of the products for powdery mildew you can actually use late in flower. So what I like to say early on is to combat powdery mildew with applications of Regalia CG. We do that once weekly, and then of course after that, other products would be either sulfur or something like Millstop, which is I think potassium bicarbonate, and or some oils also has some activity, and then of course the peroxyacetic acid. So a lot of you guys know xylitol. We have a product called Jet Ag. It's a 5% peroxyacetic acid solution plus hydrogen peroxide, just like xylitol, which is a 2% solution. But those products you can use as just a knockdown. So you can see that white mycelium. On the white mycelium is a lot of spores as well. So if you spray these products, you can pretty much kill those on contact. And so we kind of use the PAAs later in flower. So let's say you have, let's say it's week 7, week 8, you're starting to see some powdery mildew on and around the flower, maybe on the sugar leaves. You want to, knock that down. So when you go to harvest, you don't have all of that on the flower. That's where the PAA comes in, the Jet Ag or the xylitol spray. That's your best friend at that point in time. Next slide. Botrytis bud rot. So this is some obviously at the end of flowering, really close to harvest, probably the last 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks during the flower period. And as far as bud rot goes, what you want to do is you want to treat or prevent it from right around early flower to mid flower is when you want to get in some applications. So some people have heard of Stargus. It's our new product. This product you want to apply really in sort of mid-flower. That way the bacillus get inside into the flower and then colonize and then basically exclude the botrytis and obviously some other things like fusarium as well. So it's a good product to put in sort of mid-flower to prevent botrytis bud rot. But if you're on a Regalia program every 7 days, you'll also get botrytis bud rot control. Typically, guys who have used Regalia 3 times, 4 times in flower, maybe they stop at week 5 of flower and then don't do anything. They still get about 50% control of their bud rot, which can be pretty important when you're talking about thousands of dollars per pound. So these 2 products we have for botrytis bud rot is going to be Regalia and Stargus. And then, of course, the Jet Ag or xylitol products, you can also spray them to knock them down. However, they're at that point, it's a little too late. You really need to do these things early on for bud rot control. The other thing you want to mention, you want to kind of make sure you do is lower the humidity just a little bit in that late flower. It doesn't really hurt too much to do that. That also kind of slow down just a little bit the botrytis bud rot applications. And of course, you don't want to have any flower wetness for too long. So if you go through a spray or if you're outside and you've got a rain coming in, just make sure that bud dries out, fairly quickly to prevent excessive bud rot. Next one. And then the third disease that we see a lot of is Fusarium oxysporum, or just Fusarium. And the real issue with Fusarium is really right around transplant in the first 3 weeks of veg. It's that where the Fusarium spores get into. They like to hang around the root zone right there with stem meets the soil. And this is where we get that dampening off or the root rot or the stem rot. Okay, and so if you see little seedlings that you just transplanted, and all of a sudden they're dying because they have a wet stem and they're just falling over, that's something you want to make sure that you can really take care of it through less watering. So at transplant, if you can reduce how much watering, how much like soil wetness you have, that can really reduce fusarium. And the second thing you can do is obviously you can drench the soil with our products like Jet Ag or Xeritol. That also basically will just disinfect things of the fusarium spores. Or you can use Regalia. So a lot of people will do basically either a whole plant dip when they go into transplant, or they just do a light drench and foliar spray right at transplant. And then every 7 days, for the first 3 weeks, you can do a light drench into the soil. You just mix that into your fertilizer at the end, and then pH is normal. And that's how we can really reduce most of what we have issues with in the greenhouse. And you can see the other pictures in there. So the mother plants, most of the inoculum that we find in issues with growers with issues with Fusarium stem rot, they come from the mother plants. They're harboring this disease. And you can see the top left picture, that right there is Fusarium and all the spores that can then, spray or blow onto the very small seedlings. Next, please. Okay, so we talk a lot about our products, and we have to have some research behind them. So many of you guys may not know that there's not all products are equal, right? So if you go to the hydroponic store, a lot of the products that you see on there are what we're called 25B products. So these are products that have been designated by EPA to be extremely low risk of anything to the environment or to health of the people or insects or whatever. And those things, a lot of those are like oils. There's a couple soaps in there, and things that are very just very benign. EPA registered products, however, have to have research to back them up. So our products are EPA registered, and in order to get an EPA registered as a biofungicide or a bioinsecticide, you need to have a whole portfolio basically of research that says, hey, it works on this disease, this insect, and it qualifies for a true product that really works, basically. So here we're showing the Regalia's efficacy on both the powdery mildew and the botrytis bud rot on cannabis. So this was done up in Canada. So we can do a little more research up in Canada prior to 2019. And now we're doing a lot of research here in the States. So on the left, you can see the untreated controls in the brown. So the left bar, so the big bar bad, little bar good. And you can see Regalia at 1 quart per acre, 2 quarts per acre, or 3 quarts per acre. So invariably, a little bit more, the higher end of the spectrum that you use for Regalia, you will get more control, okay? How much more control do you need? That's up to you guys. But if you use a little bit more, you're going to get a little bit more control and a little bit more plant health reaction to it. And what we see also is a bud rot control. So in this research, we have about 15% of the flowers coming down with botrytis bud rot in the untreated control. And then if you use, let's say, Regalia, just 1 quart, that can bring it down to about 7.5. So again, like I said, 50% control, a reduction is something that we tout. And this is 3 applications, made on a 7-day schedule. So you can see that it's highly efficacious and not extremely expensive to do, and it will save you lots of money in dead cannabis. So we go to the next one, please. This next slide is basically showing how, okay, well, if you control the powdery mildew and the botrytis bud rot, what can we see in that study as far as the differences, right? Okay, maybe there's like 15% incidence difference. What does that mean? So what that means is on the untreated control side, we got 600 and let's say 35 grams of marketable cannabis bud. If you use 1 quart of Regalia CG, you got 660 60, let's say, 65 grams. So you already have more grams. At the end, if you see that Regalia CG at 3 quarts, the biggest bar out of there, you're almost up to 800 grams. So again, an extra 200 grams is pretty darn good for 3 applications of 3, quarts per acre of our Regalia product. Okay, so you can see that not only do you reduce diseases, but you're also going to increase the marketable harvest at the end because of that. I wanted to say real quick, I saw a question came up. I think Nic answered it. It was something about worms can come in and they cause botrytis bud rot. That is correct. So outdoor applications, so a lot of what we're talking about right now is indoor cannabis, but outdoor cannabis, the number one issue, I think, around the United States right now is a corn earworm or some kind of moth or caterpillar species that basically gets into the flower right around mid-flower and then starts basically killing it or just, chewing on the flower, the cola itself. And just so you know, is if you're going to target, to prevent the worm from coming in, you're going to target that as the cola is sort of forming, it's still open. You're gonna apply some products that go against that basically kill the worms, and at the same time you should really put out Stargus, and that's also going to prevent the botrytis bud rot and other damage from happening as well. So I can go into a little bit more if more people are growing outdoors and have issues with that, because that was a real big issue in 2019 for hemp. Next slide, please. Okay, so another story. So if you look at, how does Stargus work as compared to like something called Botry Stop. And Botry Stop just basically is Botrytis Stop is a product that's been around for a long time. And it's one of the very few, many years ago, very few products that we had at late flower that you could put on for cannabis. And it works to a certain extent, but you can see that Stargus even has even better efficacy at the end of our trial. And we put it out 2 quarts per acre. And you can see that the pressure of botrytis bud rot at this location was very high. So you see the untreated control. So this is October 14th, 2019, 65% disease, or 65% of the buds were infected with botrytis bud rot. That's a high level of disease for a trial. So when you say you can put on a bunch of applications of Stargus, and you're going to get maybe 15% at the end of disease, that's really, really good. So the products are working really well, saves you tons of money, and yeah, Stargus. It's quickly becoming one of our botrytis go-tos right now. There's a couple other products that it competes against in the marketplace. But as far as the quality of control with the price, we've got a really great product right here. Next slide, please. Stargus biofungicide reduces botrytis bud rot on hemp. So again, we tried this on hemp outdoors, and you can see that the percent disease severity went from 65% down to 15%. At this Oregon-grown location. Next, please. Regalia CG. Okay, so let's just talk about really quickly about it.
Here, Matt, this is where I'm going to take over.
Yep. Okay,
right.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah, I'll tag you back in when we get back to the insects.
Right on.
All right, so Regalia, as we all know, is our liquid biofungicide. If we're talking field application rates, we're looking at 1 to 4 quarts per acre. When you start doing small applications, typically indoor operations, things like that, a lot of growers go milliliters per gallon. In that case, 30 mils per gallon per 1,000 square feet is really what you're looking for. You don't want to go over 1% volume to volume solution there. So that would be like 1 gallon of Regalia and 100 gallons of spray volume. As long as you keep it under that, you'll be okay. The active ingredient of Regalia is Rhaeneutra saccharolennis, which is actually a giant knotweed is the common name of that plant. And it is it's a plant extract that we take and ferment and jug it up, and it has amazing broad spectrum fungal and bacterial management properties. It's definitely a preventative mode of action. I'll cover that more on the next slide. We do have a frat code of P5. It's highly tank mix compatible. For flowering plants, you can use it for foliar applications, aerial applications, chemigation, and pre-plant dip. A lot of growers that I've talked to really see a lot of benefits with using it during transplant or right after transplant, watering it in with transplant. And I know there's a huge following up in the Emerald Triangle using it as a chemigation all the way through flower, irrigating with it. These guys have seen whole plant effects from that. So I think that's pretty awesome. We're organic registered, MRL exempt. We have a 0-day post-harvest interval. It requires minimal PPE when you're comparing it to a lot of other pesticides. Always read and follow the label instructions and make sure that you properly protect your workers. I wouldn't expect you to get any major harm from regalia if you were exposed to it, but you still always want to follow your label instructions and keep yourself safe. And let me go to the next slide here, sorry. All right, so regalia has multiple modes of action. We're inducing systemic resistance within inside the plant. So basically, the ISR and SAR pathways are triggered within the plant, which creates several antimicrobial compounds, phenolics, phytoalexins, PR proteins. Basically, these are all they're all molecules within inside the plant cell that when the pathogen breaks into the plant cell, they attack the pathogen before it can actually take hold and do damage to the plant. The second mode of action of regalia is it strengthens the cell wall. So the ISR response in the plant signals it to accumulate more lignin in the cell wall. That thickens and strengthens the cell wall, making it harder for the pathogens to break into the cell. And then it also, regalia, when plants treated with regalia, also it stimulates the production of different phytohormones and chlorophyll. And when you have higher levels of chlorophyll, you have greater photosynthetic potential going on inside the plant. You see an increased growth response. And so here we're looking at a trial. This one I think is done in Canada as well. And basically it's analyzing the amount of chlorophyll in the leaves. You can see the control here had about 3 nanograms of chlorophyll, I think it was nanograms of chlorophyll per milliliter. When it was treated with regalia, it went up to about 5. So you definitely can see the greening response inside the plant. A lot of growers will tell me that they see the plants praying after being treated with regalia, and that's kind of that response you're seeing there. Here we see regalia treated. These are hemp transplants, but as we know, hemp is cannabis. Cannabis is hemp. They're just different levels of the active ingredients. These were treated in the greenhouse with 2 drenches and then brought out to the field. And you can see how the regalia treated section have bigger, healthier, hardier plants. And I'm sure you would get an increased yield on that if you were to take it all the way to harvest. Another interesting aspect of regalia is when you're using it in a chemigation or a drench application, you will see an increase in root growth typically. This is why a lot of growers like to use it at transplant. And here we have another slide just showing what happens when you chemigate with, so this has foliar and chemigation, and it was treated at transplant. And you can see typically the field here looks very healthy. This plant in the front was not treated, not chemigated, and is covered in bud rot. Let's see here, next slide. So why would a grower want to choose regalia? You're going to have increased plant health, which will hopefully increase your yield as well. It's very compatible and flexible. You can go out and spray. 4 hours later, you can go back in and start pruning your plants, doing whatever maintenance you have to do. We have the CG line of all of our products goes through additional quality control testing. So we'll make sure you'll never fail for heavy metals, pesticide residues, or human pathogens due to our product. So that just offers additional peace of mind for growers. And let's see here. So now we're going to touch on Stargus. So I will say Stargus right now is pending a label update for California. That label update will add flowering plants and a whole bunch of other crops to the label and is pretty broad. At that point, I would expect that most county ag commissioners would allow the use of Stargus. At the end of the day in California right now, it is down to the county ag commissioner to determine if a product meets the requirements or not for use in California. So Stargus is a liquid biofungicide. If we're talking field applications, we would think 1 to 4 quarts per acre. When we start going into like greenhouse applications, small tank mix, things like that, the rate would be 30 milliliters per gallon. It is best used preventatively. It could be used to control foliar or soil-borne diseases based on what you're targeting. The active ingredient is a unique isolate of Bacillus nakamurae F727. However, if you read the label on Stargus right now, it will say Bacillus amylifactius F727. However, that strain is so unique that it is in the process of being reclassified and renamed, hence why we have the new name listed. It is broad spectrum, containing the peptides produced during fermentation, and which may have multiple and novel modes of action, and I'll cover more on the next slide. Like most of our other products, it is OMRI listed, MRL exempt. We have 0-day post-harvest intervals, minimal PPEs required, and only a 4-hour reentry interval. So you can flexible label scheduling, and it does have some ISR activity inside the plant, which we will cover more 3 slides from now. The target diseases for Stargus are downy mildew, pythium, phytophthora, late blight, pink rot, botrytis, which we all know is gray mold, fusarium, rhizoctonia, and sclerotinia. I can never say that right, which is commonly called white mold. Stargus compares to some other Bacillus products out there. However, our unique strain is very hardy. We designed it when we were doing our R&D. It was really aimed at being able to fight downy mildew, which is harder to kill than powdery mildew. Some of the other Bacillus products out there you might be familiar with: Double Nickel, Sonata, Serenade, etc., things like that. They're all unique. They all have their pros and their cons. However, I'm pretty big fan of Stargus right now. It's very robust. All right, now we're getting into the fun parts here, the mode of action. So Stargus's mode of action really comes down to the active molecules, the peptides, which are produced during the fermentation process. These peptides actually attack the spore germination tubes. So as the spore is germinating, it attacks that part that's going to come penetrate the plant, and that kills it. It's somewhat similar to a contact kill mode of action. You will also see leaf root colonization. So these are living spores. So if you do spray leaf material, it'll colonize that leaf material, as you can kind of see demonstrated here in this Petri dish. This top was treated with Stargus up here, and the bottom here has some botrytis infestation started on there. And you can see the Stargus not only colonized this section right here, and its peptides are providing protection all the way down, at least halfway through the tray there. You can really see the activity of that in this slide here. So it also triggers some induced systemic response inside the plant, which basically just boosts the plant's immune system, making it more able and better suited to defend itself from pathogens. Stargus has a FRAC code of BM02. And I'll go into some physical properties of Stargus here. So here we see it's very easy to use and mix, dissolves rapidly in water. And again, we can see the colonization up here on a Petri plate. So this was treated with Stargus, and you can just see the bacteria in Stargus taking hold here and colonizing that plate. And that's really what you're looking for when you want something that will prevent a pathogen from getting in your plant. All right, so this is JetAg. It's our peracetic acid product. Some growers are familiar with peracetic acid. Basically what it is, it's a fungicide, bacteriocide, and algaecide for agricultural uses. It controls foliar and soil-borne diseases depending on how you go about using it. There's the active ingredient is peracetic acid. The mode of action, the mode of action is oxidation. So it's oxidizing the pathogens. If it can contact it, it's going to oxidize it as far as pathogens go. However, plant cells and fungal cells or bacterial cells are made up of different compounds. So it's not going to oxidize your plant surface unless there's like a disease lesion on it. Something good to keep in mind there. It is compatible with most crop protection products. You don't want to mix it with any metal products, so always read the label before you use it. Because it is a physical mode of action, you're not going to see pathogen resistance like you could with some other products. It leaves no residue. It dries to water, I think it's oxygen and acetic acid, so it breaks down into very inert things very quickly. As soon as you spray it on the plant, it's wet. It goes about oxidizing things. As it dries, it breaks down and will leave no residue. So that is a bonus. It's OMRI listed, MRL exempt, has 0-day post-harvest interval, 4-hour REI in California. I think outside of California, it's until the spray is dry. It can be used in conventional and organic programs because it is OMRI listed. So here we'll get into a little bit more about the mode of action. The primary mode of action is oxidation. So peracetic acid disinfects by oxidizing the outer layer of the cellular membrane of vegetative cells, vegetative bacterial cells, endospores, yeast, and mold spores. So if you're a spore you do not want to contact with JEDAG, that would be a very bad day. So when something oxidizes something, it's really transferring electrons. Therefore, the stronger the oxidizer, the faster the electrons are transferred to the microorganism, and the faster the microorganism is killed or inactivated. We can just look at this little chart here, looking at the different electron volts available. So hydrogen peroxide, you're looking at 1.3. Sodium hypochloride, you're looking at 1.3 as well. Chlorine dioxide, you get a little bit faster, but peracetic acid, it has the highest electron volts. It's really good sanitizer. Has broad uses on one label. So we have soil treatments, we have foliar applications. You can use it for irrigation and water treatment. Let's say you might not have the cleanest source of water and you're worried about infecting your plants with pathogens. You can treat that water with JEDAG at very low rates. You can also tank mix Regalia and JEDAG when you need more of a boost. Let's say you already have some pathogen establishing itself and you want to eradicate that. You could use JEDAG to basically surface disinfest whatever is on the plant, and then the Regalia in the tank would induce a systemic resistance inside the plant, providing lasting protection moving forward. And we call that BioUnite. We're not going to get into that right now. Just remember, prevention and early intervention are the keys to successful use of biological pesticides. And Matt, I'm going to turn this back over to you now. You're muted still, Matt.
How about now? Can you guys hear me now?
There we go.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Okay, so let's talk about insects. Cannabis arthropods, insects and mites, pests and biological solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the emerging pests that just keep an eye on, especially on, it's called beet leafhopper virus. Is basically this beet leafhopper will transmit a virus called beet curly top virus. We've seen that pop up here in southern Oregon and California. And then we have something called wireworms. That is not typically something we see on the West Coast, but something we could probably see on the East Coast more. Unless, Nick, have you seen any of this in California, or is this more of an East Coast thing?
I haven't personally. I know we get some wireworm out here, but it's not major pests.
Yeah, I think it's more of a pest out east. Okay, next slide, please. So just keep an eye out for those pests. So the biggest ones that we're gonna cover, obviously, are the ones that cannabis growers typically have all seen at some point, right? So spider mites is one of the #1 issues we have indoors, and it can be an issue outdoors as well, but typically it's an indoor pest problem. And just so you know, these are actual pictures from a grow that I visited last year in Oregon. Thankfully, they were producing hemp seed, so they didn't really care if they had so much mites on them, but they still had a decent harvest. But if you let it go, boom, they can really get out of control. And hot, humid conditions inside greenhouses or grow rooms can just explode a population. So the warmer and more humid the environment is, the faster these insects multiply. And this goes with much of the insects that we deal with in cannabis production. So typical what we use as far as spider mite control would be Grandivo CG, Venerate CG, azadirachtin, oils, pyrethrins. Those, yeah, that's about it. So when oils kind of take care of everything, right? So you've got Pure Crop One, you've got Sulf Oil X, you've got neem oil, and so a lot of these products, they work really well. There's one organic pyrethrin in the market. Most of you guys have probably seen it. It's Pyganic Specialty 5.0, as I believe is what most people are using for cannabis. If it's allowed in your state, it's a good product to use 1 or 2 times for some heavy, insect issues. Because it's an organic pyrethrin, it does a good job of knocking down insects. However, it's a single site mode of action. And what that means basically is you can get resistance buildup fairly quickly. And pyrethrin's been around for decades, so it's very common to have resistance issues to those to that chemistry. As far as Grandivo CG and Venerate CG goes, these products do not have any resistance issues whatsoever. You can spray these things all day long. They're multi-site modes of action, so it's very, very hard for any insect to be resistant to these chemistries. Azadirachtin is basically the active ingredient of the neem oil. Does a great job in controlling all stages, including the eggs, for that matter, is what I've been told, of the mites, the spider mites, and a couple other mites as well. The other thing you can use, obviously, is beneficial insects, right? So we haven't really talked about beneficial insects, but if you're going to be using beneficial insects, you want to make sure that you get the population of spider mites or russet mites or whatever insect you've got. You want to make sure you have that population under control, and typically you have to use some of these products. And then once you get the population under control to some extent, right? So let's say you had 100 insects per leaf. Now you get down to 10. Well, then maybe you can put out those beneficial insects to kind of clean up the rest, and the rest of the mid to late flower. Okay. Early on in veg, obviously you can use the pyrethrin, but once you get into flower, you can't because it'll fail a test. And just be aware once you see some insects coming in, go ahead and treat them early and often, because once they get out of hand in late flower, there's really not much you can do about them, except for beneficial insects. And one thing to touch on with beneficial insects is if you're going to use any of these products, use them before, obviously, you put out the beneficial insects. And if you're doing a lot of beneficial insects, as far as your control goes, Grandivo CG is probably the safest product to use in conjunction with beneficial insects. And why is that? Grandivo gets inside the leaf and basically will the only way that the insect can take up the product is if it ingests it. So it has to, go into the leaf and pull up that product. So as far as Gram-negative CG is, when we spray the plants down, we don't necessarily get any beneficial insect kill because it's not going outside. It has to go inside. So there you go. Let's go to the next slide. All right, hemp russet mites. This is one that we've been dealing with for a long time. They're tiny little guys. They're very hard to see. Most likely, what you'll see is this, the cupping, the ridges of the leaves, the distortion of the growing points and the flower points, and a lot of the same products that we talked about for the mites are what we're using for hemp russet mites as well. And the one little extra that we put in there is sulfur. So if you're using sulfur in any application as far as powdery mildew control, you're gonna get some reduction or control of russet mites. It's pretty nice. So and anytime you're going to use a sulfur, typically if you're using it for insects, you kind of want to do it every 10 days or so. If you're doing more for powdery mildew, you could probably get away with every 2 weeks. And then once you get into flower, really the end of like week 1 or week 2 of flower, before the little buds start forming, that's when you want to end any kind of application of sulfur, or it will be in the flower and then taint the flower when you go to harvest. Okay, so as far as russet mites goes, they're tiny little guys. You definitely want to get good applications, especially into the growing points of the plants to control that. Next one. Thrips. So thrips is something we have very ubiquitous in the greenhouse grown ornamentals and vegetables. Thrips, or also called Western flower thrips, or WFT. Have you ever seen that connotation before? And what they do again is they're tiny little flying insects. They get into also the flower parts and can distort them. Small populations inside a greenhouse don't have a real effect on your yield. So don't freak out if you have some of these guys. What you're looking for in order to see them, maybe you'll see some of the symptoms or the signs, or you'll see on the leaf some like little whitish speckling. That's basically the way the mouth parts rasp around and dig out the leaf in order for them to feed on it. And you can see there in the middle of the picture, well, those are all Western flower thrips, and then right in the middle is an aphid. So kind of give you a difference in size between a thrip and an aphid. And they're about the same if you look at them at the early stage, okay? But if the population gets out of control, and that bottom picture there, you can see a lot of leaf stippling, some yellowing around the edges. That's a population where it's a little too high, and then you're going to see some flower deformation and some yield loss. So what are we using? A lot of the same products that we're using for the mites, we're going to use for the thrips as well. The one thing I want to note about thrips, if you have them, is that there's a soil life cycle. So make sure you go into the soil with a couple of drenches. Go ahead and use Venerate CG to do a little light drench.
I can't hear you anymore, Matt. Did we lose Matt? All right, here, I'll take over for Matt. I guess we're having a little technical difficulties here. No problem, we'll make it work. If you can come back on, Matt, you're welcome to at any time. All right. We're gonna look at cannabis aphids and rice root aphids here. So on the left,
Nick, can you hear me now?
There you go.
You can hear me?
Now I can,
okay.
yeah.
Sorry, guys. I don't know what happened there. The phone just went dead. So I am now on the computer side of things. So as long as you can hear me, I can't hear you guys, but you guys can hear me. So Nick, give me a thumbs up, just make sure we're good. Okay, so I'm sorry about the technical portion of this here. The cannabis aphid and the rice root aphid, obviously they're two different things, right? So the cannabis aphid is in the foliar side of things, where the rice root aphid is in the roots. So on the left-hand side picture, you see the foliar aphid. It's a light, like a light green to an opaque kind of a white kind of a look to it. That's where you're going to look for foliar. It's up there. They're going to be underside the leaves, typically at the bottom near the stems and the veins. And they basically just feed on and multiply and destroy from there. But you can kind of get a handle on them. What we're using for those are Venerate CG, Grandivo CG. They're fairly decent on them. I like to combine our products though with MP to get a little bit better efficacy, or like azadirachtin or some oils, and a lot of those are good, right? If they're in veg, you can use a pyrethrin to kind of knock them down, and then add the Venerate or Grandivo or oil or PFR 97 or something like that as a follow-up application. Or you can combine two products, right? So you can take the Venerate CG, combine it with, let's say, azadirachtin and hit it together, okay? As far as a root aphid goes, if you get these root aphids into your indoor grow operation, the best thing you need to do is figure out how to quarantine out of these things, because you can spend all the money and time you want in drenching your soil to try to mitigate the amount of root aphids you have, but you'll never get rid of them. You may if you've got some crazy other active ingredient that is not legal. There's a couple of products out there, I'm sure. But in the products that we have in the cannabis, growing for in 2021 right now, the ones that you see and a couple other ones, these are sort of the general products that people are using that do a great work on this, okay? But as far as root aphids goes, they are notorious to sort of escape products as you're drenching them. So what I like to do is if it's obviously it's in veg, you can do a root drench of pyrethrin. So the Pyganic specialty, do a root drench of that. You can add it into your fertilizer, and then do an application. My favorite combination right now is Venerate CG plus PFR 97 as a root drench. The way the Venerate works, it breaks down to the exoskeleton, and then the PFR 97 that allows for more biologicals to get inside those insects to do their killing. So that's how I like to use it for root aphids. Again, if you have root aphids and you finally get through flower, you should truly think about taking one of your rooms and making it into a quarantine room, and slowly but surely making sure all your plants are absolutely free of root aphids going forward. So next slide, please.
I have one thing to add on the root aphids. I've heard from some pest control advisors in the cannabis world.
Nick, I can't hear you.
That it's gonna be 1 second. If you bag it up in a very fine mesh bag, your root ball, and put a rubber band around the stem, you can somewhat mitigate the transmittance of the root aphids, just as another control method. It's all you, Matt.
Okay, sorry, Nick. I can't hear you, so I'm just kind of looking to see. Corn earworm, armyworm. So we had the question that popped up earlier. So this is probably, if you're growing outdoors, either hemp or cannabis, this is one of the worst things you're gonna come across, and it's something that you very need. I want to make sure you guys understand that if you don't treat for this, you could lose a substantial amount of your flower at harvest. So please try to figure out, when to spray these things and get some applications out there just to make sure you're covering your bases. Because once they get into the flower and once the flower closes, so that, the cola stretches and then it starts stacking. And it's that stacking process is where you want to start getting into getting your products in on that, okay? And what we like to see is Venerate CG plus one of the Bacillus products, because there's basically two types of earworms, armyworms that are outside, caterpillars that are out in the world right now for cannabis and hemp. The all the university researchers and a lot of the head growers are saying to combine both the subspecies that we have products for together with Venerate CG and apply these early on at flower formation, and then once every about 7 or 10 days until you have about 60% of or 70% of that cola has been formed together, okay? And that's an application of Venerate CG plus 2 of the Bacillus products that are on the market. And you're going to look for the subspecies Christaki and the subspecies Azawi. And those are the 2 that basically going to cover any issues that you have with the caterpillars. And the Venerate will help to degrade the exoskeleton of the caterpillar and makes everything work better together, okay? Now, and that same application, guys and girls, when you do this application, you're going to do a combination of Venerate CG, Bacillus Christaki, Bacillus Azawi, and Stargus. And the reason you do Stargus is because you want to make sure you get it in there exactly the same timing for Botrytis bud rot control. And that's really, if you can do those timings, 3 or 4 applications in mid-flower, it really is going to give you the best success for you know, the largest harvest that you guys can have. Next, please. Okay, that's a corn earworm egg. I don't expect any of you guys to pick that out, but that's something you're going to be scouting for. That's a corn earworm egg. So good luck if you want to try to find that in, you know, amongst all your plants. But listen, that is what it looks like. That if you're a good entomologist out there, have a good eye, look for this little egg. It will turn black shortly before it hatches. And so that is a real key. So for the pest control advisors out there that are looking for timing, that's their timing. Next. Okay, so just some in general considerations to know when you're treating corn earworms, okay? The larger the insect, and this goes for almost everything, the larger the insect or the older it is, the less susceptible it is to our insecticide products. It's kind of a general statement. So the smaller they are, the easier they are to control, the better results you're going to have. Okay, having said that, you want to make sure you target newly hatched larvae, right? So the first couple days, if not week after it's hatched, that's the timing you want to make sure you hit. And if you've got other agricultural fields near you, like for instance, corn or cotton, they likely have been exposed to the GMO Bt trait and may not be susceptible to that, you know, Bacillus thuringiensis product, like Christaki, like Dipel or Javelin. Therefore, you want to use the Zentari, which is the Azawi subspecies, and Venerate together. And that's why we say it. So we're not just saying it so we're trying to sell more product. We're saying this because university researchers from Colorado, Montana, Florida have all told us, you know, hey, this is the way to treat for hemp and cannabis outdoors. Okay, so next, please. I think this is where Nick's going to take over. Yeah, Nic?
Yep, here we go. All right, so we're going to take a look at Venerate here. Our picture is of the XC label, but we want you using the CG product if we're in the cannabis world. Let's see here, clicking through here. So Venerate is a liquid bioinsecticide. It's used at 1 to 4 quarts an acre if we're talking field applications. If we're talking small tank mix products or small tank mix applications, we're looking at 2 to 5 tablespoons per gallon per 1,000 square feet. The active ingredient is Burkholderia rhinogensis, which is a soil bacteria that we take and ferment. It controls foliar feeding pests, soft-bodied insects, piercing and sucking insects, thrips, mites, aphids, caterpillars, all the good stuff that affects cannabis. It has an IGR-like mode of action, so it has enzymatic degradation of exoskeleton structures. It interferes with the molting and gut disruption as well. I'll go into that more in a minute. The IRAC code, the Insect Resistance Action Committee code, is pending. It has multiple modes of action, so it's kind of hard to pin it down. And it's very tank mix compatible, no label prohibitions. It is an organic product. There's no MRL that we have to worry about. 0-day post-harvest interval, minimal PPE, 4-hour REI. It's pretty easy to use. And you can use it in foliar applications or chemigation applications, depending on what you're targeting. Always read and follow your label. So our main pests for venerate would be aphids, mites, thrips, and lepidopteran. So all your caterpillar, moth larvae, things like that. Some secondary pests, Some secondary pests could be lygus bug, mealybug, leaf hoppers, and whiteflies. Leaf hoppers and whiteflies might be an issue. I don't really see much lygus bug or mealybug in cannabis. All right, so the mode of action of venerate has a few different modes of actions here. So we'll have exoskeleton degradation, which is active against adults and nymphs. Nymphs are really what you want to target, the immature stages. You have the best efficacy, the younger the pest is. And it'll lead to molting interference as well. So exposed nymphs and immatures are unable to molt into their next life stage, which kills them. And it has some ingestion toxin as well. So it kind of does some gut disruption when the insects or mites feed on plant material that has been treated with venerate. The active ingredient, like I said, is Bulchodera rhinogensis, and it's actually heat killed as part of the fermentation process. So it's non-viable or dead. And here we see some Lepidopteran larvae that have been treated with venerate, and it's exhibiting the insect growth regulator-like symptoms where its exoskeleton is being degraded. It has melanization. We see lower pupil weights and failure to complete the life cycle, which is what you want to see in your pests, because if they're completing their life cycle, they're going to cause more damage. So we have Grandivo here, which is active ingredient is non-viable Chromobacterium subsugii in spent fermentation media. So it is another soil bacteria. It has low risk to pollinators and beneficials. Death occurs in 4 to 7 days. It inhibits reproduction and stops pest feeding. The use rate of Grandivo, if I'm not mistaken, is 2 to 4 tablespoons per gallon. That is correct. Yes, double checking myself. Always like to make sure. And so pests that if you give the pest a choice of 2 leaves, one that's been treated with Grandivo and one that's not been treated with Grandivo, they will go to the one that's not been treated. So it has repellency effects as well, which is really good. And the pests typically stop feeding within hours or minutes of application very quickly. We're ALMA registered, MRL exempt, 0-day post-harvest interval, and all that good stuff. I'm going to try to go a little quicker here because I really want to get to the good talk here. We have an awesome guest speaker who hasn't been able to talk yet. So I apologize if I rush a little bit here, but we'll probably go a little bit longer than we planned. So anyone's welcome to stay for that. The target pests for Grandivo are really thrips, mites, and aphids. It will have some activity on the Lepidopteran as well, whiteflies, psyllids. Sorry, there we go. And there's many more on the label. So the mode of action here will be agitation and repellency. So they will choose not to feed on the material. And when they do feed on it, given in like a greenhouse situation or a cannabis situation where they're not going to another plant, they will get gut disruption, and that is the main mode of action. And then you'll also see reduction in egg laying, egg hatching, and fecundancy. So from one generation to the next, you will decrease the amount that survive. Really good at limiting your pest populations that way. And of course, the pests stop feeding. So Grandivo has very low risk to beneficials because so you have your plant material here that's been treated with Grandivo, and you have your pest that's going to come across and eat or pierce that plant material and ingest the Grandivo when they do that. However, the beneficial insects that are there aren't directly feeding on that plant material, and so they are not affected by the Grandivo. And we've done a lot of studies in our lab to prove this here in Davis. We actually have a really awesome YouTube video of our lab if you ever want to go check us out on YouTube and walk through our lab. Let's see here. So the efficacy on two-spotted spider mites, this is on greenhouse cannabis in Canada in 2019. So we have the untreated control over here on the left, and what we're looking at is the number of motiles per 100 leaves. So we had extremely high press pressure of 200 mites per leaf, basically. When treated with Grandivo at 4 grams per liters, 8 grams per liters, sorry, these are Canadian measurements, we had a significant reduction. Both products and Venerate as well, we put in there to test that as well. So let me double check here, 8 milliliters per liter is equal to 1 ounce per gallon. Yeah, so 1 ounce per gallon of Venerate showed good results as well, as did 1.5 ounces. And we compared that to an insecticidal soap as our standard. We applied it and then we evaluated both 7 and 14 days after application. So you can see that the products were very effective at eliminating. So this is 4 applications on a 7-day schedule. So we did it over a month and then compared the results 2 weeks after that. And we saw a significant reduction in the population with both Grandivo and Venerate. And then this one is controlling root mealybug. Not much of a problem, but we have the data and it looks good, so we're going to show it to you. Both Venerate and Grandivo were extremely effective, Grandivo being the most effective. These were 3 drench applications on a 7-day interval. The average of 4 to 8 mealybugs per plant at the beginning of the study. Non-treated averaged 5.6 mealybugs per plant at the end of the study. And as you can see, Venerate maybe had 1, Grandivo had no mealybugs present. And let's see here. All right, control of two-spotted spider mites on cannabis. So this is in greenhouse cannabis in Canada again in 2018. And we're looking at the number of motiles per 10 leaves here. So we had a little bit lower press pressure. So this is untreated control had 200 mites per 10 leaves. Grandivo CG got it down. This is at 7.5 grams per liter, got it down to about 50. So we're looking at about a 75% reduction there. And then when we used a higher rate of Grandivo, that got it down even lower to almost no pest pressure there. So that's a 90+% control. Same thing with Venerate and at both the medium and the higher rate. So it's just kind of demonstrating how good the efficacy is on two-spotted spider mites. All right, this next one is going to be our fun section here. Sorry for making you wait so long, Darren.
No worries.
So I'll let you take over here, and then we'll kind of do a discussion back and forth, maybe something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of, a lot of what I'm going to say is echoing and reflecting on, what you already talked about and what Matt already talked about. And kind of to start with, running a cannabis commercial greenhouse, especially when you're trying to produce strictly for flower. So none of our stuff is really going to extracts. It's all going to bags and jars for consumable flower. It does pose additional challenges as far as, what you can let happen and what you can, get away with. So, and there's some, theories where they'll go and they won't care about pests until certain pest pressure or threshold is met. That you're going to see that a lot in, row crops and even, hemp fields and whatnot. However, our approach is a little bit different. We're a little bit more aggressive, and it's, kind of that early and often mentality. If you let it get to, the point where you're starting to see, fungal hyphae from PM on your leaves and whatnot, I'm not going to say that's too late, but, more could have been done probably earlier. Because, those PM spores and, have been there for a while before you start seeing it. So it's really having the attitude and the mindset that you're constantly surrounded by enemies all the time, and they're always trying to get in. Their entire purpose of their life and their existence is to do one thing. And with that understanding, I think that there's a lot of humility that comes with that. You know, and I talked to you about this in the past, Nick, is, you know, we're dealing with things with millions of years of evolutionary success. They've made it this far. And so we have to be proactive about it. And I think especially now, more than ever, as cannabis is becoming more and more acceptable, and you're starting to see a lot more transfer of genetics. And when there is that transfer of plant material, you know, there's a high probability, even if you're trying to do the right things, that you're going to pass something on you didn't want to pass on. You know, the cannabis aphid is, you know, up and down the eastern seaboard right now. You know, it didn't fly over there. You know, with the hemp bill passing, a lot of people have been, you know, shipping cuttings across the country, etc. You know, I would say that the vast majority of infections such as broad mites, russet mites, things like that, you know, the really minute pests, as well as some of the viruses and viroids, are going to be a direct cause of, you know, your practices. So, you know, looking at best practices and whatnot, you know, the biggest thing is, you know, if you can avoid having plant material come from outside your facility to inside your facility, that's preferred. If not, a dedicated quarantine area is very important, because, you know, things happen. Even if you get it from a reputable source, you know, things happen. It's agriculture, it's life. So you kind of have to treat things that you get as if it was to have something. Likewise, starting in propagation, you know, you might have a healthy mother set of plants that you're taking cuttings from, and you're not seeing any pest pressure or whatnot. It's still a good idea to, you know, treat it as if they're there. Treat it as if you have, you know, thrip instar larvae you can't see, or, you know, russet mite eggs, or whatever. So, you know, something that I like to do and recommend is, you know, a dip with the cuttings. An oil-based dip, you know, works pretty well as a suffocant. I think the most research is Suff-Oil X. And I'm not going to quote a dip rate because I'm not sure if there actually is an approved dip rate, but I know that there's some study in Canada that did at 0.1% dip rate of the Suff-Oil X, where a normal spray rate would be 1%. But that in combination with something like Venerate or a Bavaria Bassiana, you know, dipping those cuttings, and then the next day, you know, releasing beneficials. Cucumaris mites are, you know, a really great preventative biological control that are pretty cost effective. And they're going to be very effective against, you know, first instar thrip larvae. They'll be, you know, not so much against the adults, but they'll be, you know, effective against broad mites as well. Some debate about russet mite being affected by those beneficials. I think, you know, there's more and more research needs to be done with that. But it's a combination. The best practices is really using all the resources at your disposal. It's not waiting till the problem happens and being like, oh crap, well, we need to do something now. It's like, well, that problem started probably like 3 weeks ago. So the other thing that I would say to growers is, you know, it's tough, and you know, when you encounter something, especially if you've been doing well for a while, it can be just demoralizing. So I think the best thing is, you know, keeping a calm state of mind, you know, doing things that are evidence-based practice, science-based practice, is going to be important, and should give you more confidence in what you're doing. And then just, you know, really trying to stay on top of it is one of the biggest things. And really, you know, I'm a big proponent of using a combination of, you know, sprays and beneficials, especially on a high dollar crop. You know, you can get away with spending a little bit more money and having a little bit more frequent sprays than you can with something that you're selling, you know, $1 a pound. We're selling $3,000 a pound for finished flower. You know, you can justify those things. Just to touch on one thing, before I start looking at this slide, I mentioned oils. And I just wanted to say that not all oils are created equally. And, I'm a big proponent using natural things like that. And, I've grown a lot of regenerative type agriculture, try to minimize inputs. And, there's great, ideas about rosemary oil, lavender oil, things like that. But I would say, again, I would stick with the research if possible. And I think things like Sulfonyl X or things of that nature are really going to be the best benefit. The other thing is, there's some people that don't like to use, things like JMS stylet oil or soft oil because say, oh, it's petroleum based, it's bad for the environment. Okay, well, think about how much lavender has to be harvested to make some lavender oil to spray on a greenhouse. That's why you see some of these products that are cannabis directed. They're directed at growers that are, $400 a bottle, and application rate is, 22 ounces a gallon or something. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but, you can also get something with proven efficacy for, $55 for 2.5 gallons that will make 250 gallons of spray. So I think that really just studying your enemy, studying, the pests, studying the diseases, how they work, and getting ahead of them, because that's what it really is. It's, when I'm mapping out IPM sprays and insect releases, I almost look at it like as a battlefield, like mapping out a strategy of what we need to do. And sometimes they get the best of you. It just happens. But just staying proactive and early and frequent applications early, even when you're not seeing things, is super important. Looking at the slide, the pressure
give me 1 second,
changes.
Darren.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have like 4 or 5 minutes. We can't start the next webinar, which we have after this for leafy greens, until we finish our webinar. So we actually got rust more than we thought we were going to be.
Got it.
Which I apologize.
No worries. I mean, I think that I touched on a lot about that stuff, but yeah.
Is there anything else you want to touch on this slide?
Yeah, with the slide, the cultural practices of the greenhouse, I would say that a lot of people ignore that. So when I say cultural practices, inside and outside cleanliness, sanitation is huge. Maintenance has to be constantly going. There's going to be constant vectors, whether it's people touring your greenhouse or electricians, etc. And you can limit that, put people in Tyvek suits, have specific tools and specific cleanup things per zone, per room. It's very important not to, be careful of the things that can vector diseases. Like when you're walking through plants, like, try not to brush up against everything, just basic little things like that can make a big difference. And I say, sanitation, staying on top of it, and just making sure that your area is clean and pests don't have anywhere to hide or, come to, that's a really big part of it as well.
All right. So we covered on most of this here. We have your awesome canopy management photo on the left here. Photo in the center of one of your former workers there, spreading some trellis netting out.
Yeah, with an excellent trellis tech.
Yeah.
For everybody, that's Nick. Nick came up with that, and that was actually a pretty good tech that a lot of greenhouses around California are using now. So kudos to him on that.
Like you said, we have millions of years of pest evolution working against us. Be smart and rotate your mode of actions.
Yeah, switching things between, switching up between Grandivo and Venerate, and also using products that are synergistic in nature, with them is an important thing. And regarding testing in California, that's something just to take note of, and this should obviously be further researched, but for the most part, they just test for, things like Aspergillus, Salmonella, etc. So they're not testing for a total bacteria count. In other states, I think Arizona is one of them, they might test for a total like CFU or a total propagules per gram. So you have to be careful about the state you're in, about what biologicals you're using and when you can use them. So that's another piece of advice.
These are some of the products they've used in the past or currently use here.
Yeah.
With a lot of bioinsecticides, I'm just going to take this real quick here for you, Darren. Getting thorough coverage is important. You need to, contact the pest. It's not systemic. It's not going to translocate throughout the plant. You have to actually contact that pest. So using a high quality sprayer with a good nozzle, typically hollow cone nozzles are best to penetrate into a dense canopy like you would find in cannabis.
Not a paint sprayer.
Not a paint sprayer, not a backpack sprayer, not a pump sprayer, not a squirt bottle. Get a good sprayer. It'll pay dividends in the long run. And really be cognizant of how you're spraying. Spray underneath the plants first, then go back and get the tops. Make sure you thoroughly cover that plant for good protection if you want to have good efficacy and good results. All right, anything else you want to say here, Darren?
No, I mean, again, just, stay proactive and, take it as a challenge. I think a lot of people, get discouraged, and it's just one of those things that is something you got to get through and work through to become, a seasoned grower. I mean, there's no such thing as a master grower. I hate that term. And, you're constantly learning. And, I think the biggest thing is just staying humble, listening to different opinions, but then again, also everything you're doing should be grounded in some sort of scientific empirical evidence and research, not the whole bro science that a lot of us have come up with, growing cannabis. So.
All right, these are our products we went over today. Remember, prevention and/or early intervention are the key to success when using biological products. At Marrone Bio, we've put together this really awesome cannabis pest guide. You can feel free to contact any of our reps and we can get these to you. They're nice laminated waxy paper that you can hang up in a greenhouse. They're really good for training new employees on what to look at, kind of give an idea of some pest control for some people who aren't familiar with it. It is more base level information, I would say, if you really start getting into things. We have hemp and cannabis IPM programs available. We're actually updating our cannabis program right now, so look forward to that release soon. And we have a pretty large covering of salespeople here. I highlighted our speakers, which is myself and Matthew Brecht. Feel free to screenshot this. The presentation will also be, I believe, sent out to all the attendees later on today, or whenever tomorrow when the follow email goes out. And so if you need any of that information, it's here. We have a pretty awesome technical support team. Pretty much everyone here has a PhD and are very smart and know a lot about biologicals. So we rely on them heavily. Here's our trademark slide. I would say any questions, but unfortunately we really have to wrap this up because we have another webinar going on right after it. And I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Darren, for being here today. Thank you, Matt, for sharing your knowledge with us. And thanks, Angela, for helping us put on the webinar. So I hope everyone had a great day, and see you next time. And maybe next time we'll have to do a round table and just get some growers together and sit down in a less formal setting.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everyone.